You're listening to The Uncrucified, a fanfiction written and narrated by author Angela R. Sasser. This is an unofficial fan work which takes place within the Exalted 2nd Edition setting created by White Wolf and Onyx Path Publishing. Entry 6. Innocence. Aran Vadras, my father, the eccentric merchant prince, known as the Fearless Seeker, was found dead in his own bed in the warmth of fire ascending, the year RY 763. It was I who found him that fateful morning. I noticed he had slept in longer than usual, for he was a prompt and studious man, and I thought I'd relieve our servants of the responsibility of bringing him his morning tea and biscuits, so I could tease him about his growing bad habits. I cannot describe the horror of finding someone so dear simply gone. He had been there smiling and laughing with me just the night before. By the time I found him, death had already made his lips a shade of blue, a patch of foam congealed at the corner of his mouth, a curious detail that I was too distraught to notice then. The servants heard my startled yelling as I tried to wake him up to no avail. I kept trying, even when they pulled me away and fetched help. Doctors, associates, and priests came and went in the hustle of death preparations, but my world remained unearthly still, the voices around me falling away, ignored. I could only sit in the chair by his bed and stare at his cold body, trying to convince myself he was only sleeping, but knowing that was only a childish wish. A gold-embroidered black veil was placed over his face out of respect. The priest would come for him soon. It was only the head priest's soothing, compassionate tone that brought me back to the world. "You are his daughter, his only family, yes?" Funny, nobody else had asked me up to that point. I nodded weakly in reply. He took my hand in his. I remember he was surprisingly gentle. I remember the prayer talismans hanging from his belt jingling with little bells. A daughter should make the preparations. It will bring him peace and tranquility in his next life. But I wasn't ready to let him go in this life. Not yet. Not yet. I clenched the priest's hand hard. He didn't seem to mind. The priest let me stay like that for as long as I wanted, until I finally could speak again. Yes, I will make the preparations. An organizational task would be a welcome distraction. I took comfort that I was his daughter, the child of Aran Vadras. Even if we were tied by different bonds than blood, I would do what love dictated and see him on the path the way that any dutiful daughter would. The priest took him then. I could only stare, still frozen from grief, as they gently and respectfully bathed him with white cloth and wrapped him in white silk, then carried his silk-swaddled body away on a stretcher. Over the next couple of days, with a hollow in my chest, I set about the task of planning my father's funeral. Notices were drafted and sent to his close friends and business associates. I decided to buy the candles and votives needed for the service myself, and ventured to the marketplace. I barely noticed the looks I was getting along the way. My mind was too set on the task of funeral preparations to care. And then I saw it. On the marketplace community board, printed in large font and stamped with the guild's mark. Wanted alive for questioning and suspicion of murder, Kalara Vadras, daughter of Aran Vadras, the victim. For the second time in just a few days, my heart skipped a beat in my chest. I finally noticed the stares and glares from passers-by, from shopkeepers I had spoken to many times. I tore the paper from the board, and very nearly thought to stomp my way to the magistrate's office and accuse them of posting gross misinformation. But common sense finally took over. Something was wrong, very wrong, and it wasn't a printing mistake. I quickly hurried with my shawl pulled over my head to a friend's house. Melkar's face when he opened the door told me everything I needed to know. This was indeed very bad. He had the forethought to leave a bottle of wine on the table and sit me down to explain the situation. "They're calling for your arrest. They're saying you poisoned him, Kalara." The full extent of the horror and deceit of what had finally happened to Aaron was finally beginning to dawn on me. Who would do this? Why would they do this? Gods, I was so naive then. For as many years as I endured the cruelty of mortals, Aaron's love had blinded me, lulled me into thinking that because of what he did for me, anything was possible, that people and the world could change. How wrong I had been! Together with my colleague, I devised a plan to escape the city, for as painful as it was to abandon the preparation of my father's funeral, I knew I couldn't stay. As naive as I was back then, I understood that whatever was happening, the chances that I would have to explain myself were slim. The guild could take me without a trial if they pleased, and I knew what that meant. Melkar arranged a barge to meet me at sunset, where I would be whisked away to a safe house at his cousin's. Everything seemed to be going to plan. I was able to quietly weave my way through town to the docks without incident where the barge awaited. The captain beckoned me on board with hushed tones and went ashore to make one final preparation. I started to let out the breath that I had been holding ever since I saw the announcement. I saw the shadow that moved from within the blue sails, too late to do anything about it. I caught only a brief glimpse of the water aspect's face before I felt a stabbing pain in my temple and fell into unconsciousness. I awoke on the cold, dank floor of a prison cell, my hands and feet bound in cold iron shackles. It was an old, familiar sensation that sent chills up my spine, sending me ever so briefly back to a moment in my past where I had displeased a master. A voice I barely recognized greeted me from the shadows. "Hello, Kalara. Did you sleep well?" I squinted, still trying to identify this vaguely familiar voice. My breath caught in my chest at the revelation once he stepped into the light in front of my cell. It was Factor Oroshu, a colleague of my father's in the merchant branch. He was a tall, thin-bearded man, clothed in rich silks, whom I had known from meetings I had attended with my father. As one of the factors, he had a great deal of control over the flow of the district. I remember my father only dealt with him when he absolutely had to. The factor was a deplorable businessman who was said to make a majority of his profits from illegal bandit raids conducted across the countryside, among other practices. It was rumored the only reason the guild warden hadn't taken him to task was because of some deep, dark secret he held against him. I remember how Arosha would look at me during the meetings, especially when Aaron would speak his piece about certain practices. His black eyes would always bore into me, as if I were responsible for Aaron's renewed interest and straightforwardness in guild affairs. The devil's slave woman whispering in his ear with her infectious ideals. We had spoken only briefly, both times in which I could only respond with hollow acknowledgments because of his higher ranking. Both times he let me know in subtle, biting ways that I wasn't worthy to lick the dirt from his shoes. I could never have guessed at the true depths of the disdain he harbored for me. Factor Oroshu sneered and turned to nod at the cloaked water aspect that had been standing a little farther off. I could only stare back and forth between them, confused. "That will be all. You've done well. She shouldn't be a problem from here on out." Oroshu waved the man off without so much as a glance his way. I remember staring after the cloaked man, my eyes pleading and fearful. Before he turned to leave, my gaze locked with his, and I heard him say, "It's nothing personal." As if that apology would exempt him from whatever fate he was about to leave me to. With that, he simply left. Nothing personal. I would never forget that sentiment, or his cold, unfeeling stare. Even still, my mind went around in circles trying to understand Oroshu. I pleaded with him. He couldn't truly be responsible for what I was barely beginning to understand. He couldn't be that close-minded against change. I voiced my disbelief at his short-sightedness, at his inability to understand how we could change things, and still make a profit. I was in denial. I couldn't accept what my heart already knew. My passionate outbursts only made the factor laugh. "Short-sighted?" he hissed. "It was you and your father's short-sightedness that made this unavoidable. You killed him, don't you see? You poisoned him in the night, you filthy little slave. He didn't deserve such an end. Aaron was too stubborn to see reason, so we had to act." Those words struck me silent, as if they were a blow to the face, the realization of the plot finally starting to settle in. They had done this. Our very own organization. The organization we both loved and believed in. They had killed him. All of the little details I hadn't noticed earlier started to sting in my mind. The foam at the corner of his mouth. A faint, sweet smell. The medicine. Oroshu seemed gratified by my silence, and left me there in the darkness. Tomorrow, he said, I would be punished for my sins against the guild. I could only sit back on my haunches, the weight of the chains not nearly as heavy as the weight of the events that had just transpired. My father had died not only 2 days before, but it was my spirit that died that day, crushed under heel by my own naivete and the machinations of fearful mortals.